War.
I'm so upset. Oh my God.
But God!
Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and I am so excited for the program today. We will be having an interview to kind of, catch us up on maybe some of the more nuanced elements of this war against Iran that we're not getting from traditional or legacy media. Glenn Diesen, Professor Glenn Diesen, will be joining us to talk about the latest in Iran and what is likely to happen in the Middle East, because of course we are getting a ton of mixed messaging from the Trump administration. In fact, we're going to also talk about the messaging that we're getting from the Trump administration, including some of the moments from his interview with Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business. Later in the show, a story that I genuinely think you need to know about. It looks like World Liberty Financial, that cryptocurrency company that's founded and run by Trump's sons, sure seems like they're carrying out the same kind of fraud and bad behavior that, that Friedman guy, what was his name? Remember the guy who was messing around with investments in crypto? Sam Bankman-Fried, boom, that's the guy I was talking about. Seems like they're running a similar scam. I'm gonna give you the details, you can decide for yourselves. That'll be in the second hour of the show. And we'll also touch on the energy crisis, which was spurred by this ridiculous, disastrous war in Iran. And even if everything ends right now, we are in for a lot of pain already. So before we get into all of that, please like and share the stream if you're watching us live. You can also become a member and support the show that way by going to go to youtube.com. I'm sorry, hit the join button if you're watching us on YouTube, or go to tyt.com/join. All right, let's get started with the latest messaging from the Trump administration and what is likely happening with this ongoing war against Iran.
Right now, you would have Iran with a nuclear weapon. And if they had a nuclear weapon, you would be calling everybody over there, sir. And you don't want to do that.
Well, you keep saying was. Is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country.
So is it over or not? Now, this was an interview that President Donald Trump had with Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business, and it made news yesterday. Every headline following the interview was that Trump declares the war is over. But is it? Is it over? And can you really trust anything that comes out of the president's mouth, given the fact that he goes back and forth within the same interview, the same hour, the same day? And in fact, on one hand, he's saying that the war is almost over. And then on the other hand, by discussing the damage the United States and Israel and its bombs have caused in Iran, well, he seems to be kind of setting a narrative for doing more damage. And the military buildup that we're currently seeing in the Middle East would prove that to be true. So let's get into the details. It is hard to decipher what Trump is really planning to do, and that's not a good place to be as an American. However, according to the Washington Post, the United States has sent thousands more troops to the Mideast in an attempt to enforce the so-called blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, as we shared with you yesterday, when the blockade was in effect, there was some indication that ships were still getting through. Remember, I mentioned the Chinese vessel that was splishing and splashing through the Strait of Hormuz? Well, that did happen. And China did issue a pretty stern message to the United States. Effectively, we have made deals with Iran. It's none of your business. Stay out. All right. But is that still the case? Is the United States allowing Chinese ships to go through? And do we really want to escalate this war by upsetting China? So apparently Trump is attempting to pressure Iran to make a deal that could end the war. But Trump also makes clear that bombings and the possibility of ground operations are still on the table. So as the Washington Post reports, the forces moving into the region include about 6,000 troops aboard the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush and several warships escorting it, said current and former officials. About 4,200 others with the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group and its embarked Marine Corps Task Force, the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, are expected to arrive near the end of the month. Hold on, pause. Near the end of the month, I thought this war was almost over. I thought this war was going to last 4 to 6 weeks. Let me continue. The troops will join the estimated 50,000 personnel that the Pentagon has said are involved in operations countering Iran. Now, a troop buildup is not a good sign if peace is what we're hoping for here. And if you think that ground operations are totally doable with the number of troops that have been accumulated in the Middle East, you should listen to Colonel Douglas Macgregor, because that's not enough troops. Ground invasion would be a complete and utter disaster. John Mearsheimer, another political scientist, has weighed in on this and said there isn't going to be a ground invasion. We don't have enough troops there. But Trump is also incredibly incompetent, and he has essentially purged the Pentagon of anyone who would try to push back or even inform him about the reality of this matter. At the same time, our Secretary of Defense is Pete Hegseth, an alcoholic Fox News weekend anchor who was promoted by Trump as our Secretary of Defense, as we are in the middle, by the way, of a disastrous war with Iran that even George W. Bush wasn't stupid enough to do. So that's the context to keep in mind. The arrival of the additional forces will provide commanders with 3 aircraft carriers in the region, each with dozens of fighter jets. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been in the Middle East since January. The USS George H.W. Bush is on its way to the Middle East. Okay, so look, it is obvious that Trump is sending additional military assets and troops to the region, possibly to attempt to take over the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know. Possibly to attempt to go into Iran and retrieve the enriched uranium. I certainly hope not. Because let me tell you something, the Iranians are not dumb. So this idea that they have all this enriched uranium buried in one place is laughable. They're way smarter than that. And so do we have the appropriate intel? Do we have the, troops and military assets necessary to do that type of special mission? But more importantly, are we pretending like retrieving Iran's enriched uranium would end all of this? It's not going to end all of this. Israel wants regime change. The head of Mossad just came out and said, we demand regime change. You're not going to get it overnight, but we're going to get it. So as long as Israel's aggression continues, the United States is forced to be involved in a war that we have no business being involved in. That is the reality of the matter. Now, what Trump ends up doing with the accumulated military assets that he sent to the Middle East, I have no idea. And that is not a great place to be. So the double Hormuz Strait blockade that was implemented by Trump, right? You have the Iranians doing a semi-blockade. They're allowing their friends and allies to transport goods and oil through the strait. But for everyone else, there might be a toll, there might be a blockade. Trump comes in after the failed talks between JD Vance, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and the Iranians and says, you know what? I'm gonna do a blockade too. No more money for you, Iran, even though the United States, our treasury, lifted sanctions on Iran in the very beginning of this war in order to allow Iran to transport oil, in order to keep oil prices somewhat under control. Now you're gonna reverse that policy? What do you think that means for the price of oil? Something you were concerned about, which is why you lifted sanctions on Iran so they can transport their oil. Do you guys see how stupid this war is? This war is so stupid. So the double Hormuz blockade that Trump announced last Sunday seems to be enforced to some extent, with some ships turning around. I'll give you an example. In the opening 48 hours of the operation, 9 merchant vessels had been intercepted by US forces and all returned to Iran without incident. More than a dozen Navy warships are positioned in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea to enforce the blockade, confronting vessels as they exit the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Iranians argue that this isn't the only way that we can transport our oil, so we're not tripping about this. We'll see. That could just be, that just could be them pretending to be confident, pretending to be calm, when in reality, the situation is pretty disastrous. But we've been at this war for over a month and they've been collecting tolls. If you listen to interviews with Iranian officials, they talk about how much money they've been able to make over the last month as a result of this war. So congratulations to Israel and the United States. So all of this actually looks like an escalation to me. You have Trump telling Maria Bartiromo, oh, the war's almost over. In reality, things are escalating. And by the way, that's not just based on my own opinion. That's based on what Joe Kent has analyzed as well. And if you're wondering who Joe Kent is, that's the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He resigned from that position recently because of this war, because of the fact that the Israelis dragged us into this war. Here's what he wrote on X. President Trump is sending more military power to the Middle East as Iran rejects our initial peace offers, setting the escalation trap. To avoid a major disaster, we must first define what is truly vital to our national interests and act accordingly. Can you imagine what our lives would be like if we decided to be allies with Iran as opposed to Israel? Just think about that. I don't really see Iran running around talking about starting wars, or more importantly, getting a foreign country to fight its wars for them. Let me give you more from Joe Kent, who says, we need the Strait of Hormuz open so oil can flow and stability can return to the energy markets and the Gulf region. These are realistic, achievable goals. They can be reached by significantly reducing our military footprint in the region and lifting sanctions on Iran. We can then tout Iran's agreement not to build a nuclear weapon as a clear win for the media. Because look, Trump clearly would like the war to end, but he's flailing and doesn't know how to make it end while keeping, Israel happy and finding a way to spin this devastating loss as a win. Now, if I were in his shoes, I would give Israel the double middle finger, tell them deuces, and I'm moving on. But Trump's not going to do that. So Israel is going to continue being a problem when it comes to de-escalation and ending this war. The other thing is, the only way that I can see a deal that would open the Strait of Hormuz is if you do it diplomatically. You'd have to pursue sincere diplomacy with the Iranians. And I don't think the Trump administration is willing to do that. In fact, that's what Joe Kent is alluding to in his X post. He also talks a little bit about Israel remaining a major problem to achieving a peaceful end to all of this. This is what he says. The key to avoiding the escalation trap and a disastrous quagmire is restraining Israel by drastically limiting the military aid we provide. Let's pause. Ending military aid, all of it. All of it. Defensive, offensive, done. Embargo. There should be a weapons embargo. Now, Kent doesn't go as far as I do, but I just think, look, he's probably under the illusion that maybe he can stay on their good side if he tones down the rhetoric and says like, oh, maybe we limit the weapons, but we don't stop sending them weapons. No. We need to decouple from Israel. There is no middle ground with Israel, as I think a lot of conservatives who used to be avid supporters of Israel, but then started to criticize some of what Israel's been up to, have learned. There is no middle ground. You have to be all in. And if you're not all in, you're an anti-Semite who supports Hezbollah or Hamas. Literally, that's their ideology. So just like rip the Band-Aid off. But let me continue with the rest of what he had to say. Israel cannot sustain this fight without us and will do everything they can to keep us engaged. We must pursue our own objectives, not theirs. I certainly agree with that last part. But we have been pursuing their objectives to our detriment. This has been going on for a very, very long time, which is why Iran escalated threats to choke off international trade with military commander Major General Ali Abdullahi saying Iran would block imports and exports from the Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, and Red Sea in response to this US blockade. So I think the big mistake that the Trump administration is making is that they seem to think Iran has no cards. Iran is not Ukraine. Iran has got cards, big cards, and they're not afraid to play them. Whether it's retaliating by attacking Gulf countries that allow the US to use its airspace to bomb Iran, whether it's cutting off other means of economic transit, right? They will do what it takes to retaliate. They're not the ones who spark it, right? They don't spark the escalation, but they do respond to escalation. And unfortunately, we have the type of president who seems to love to escalate and has this baby brain that's easy to manipulate by the likes of Mossad and the Israelis. It's pretty crazy. And so if that happens, all hell is gonna break loose. Because look, Saudi Arabia has been harmed by this war to some extent, but they've still been able to transport oil through other avenues, right? Rather than having to rely solely on the Strait of Hormuz. They've also been able to charge more for oil as a result of our supply being limited from this war. But now, those avenues that Saudi Arabia is relying on, those will be closed too, if Iran chooses to retaliate in response to Trump's blockade. By the way, China also furious by this blockade since they turned to Iran for a huge portion of their energy needs. Now, Trump has suggested that there won't be an extension of the 2-week ceasefire because he expects talks with Iran to continue later this week. We'll see. There have been other reports that no, they are considering an extension of the ceasefire. We don't know. Trump doesn't know. He just kind of shoots from the hip and decides at any given minute how he's going to behave and what decisions he's going to make in response to this war. And Netanyahu is absolutely hellbent to keep the war going. So Joe Kent is right about that. He told the public that, in Hebrew, of course, that he rejects Trump's ceasefire. It's funny because whenever he's speaking in Hebrew, he tends to tell the truth. He tends to say things that counter our president, who he goaded into fighting Israel's war. But yeah, he's like, yeah, we reject the ceasefire. Of course you do. I mean, if Israel isn't warring, what is it doing? They're constantly at war. So there are some other things to worry about as well, because the Trump administration officials have discussed launching a special operation to extract Iran's enriched uranium, something I just touched on earlier. Terrible idea. Sending Marines to coastal areas and islands in an attempt to take over Karg Island. Okay, so you guys managed to take over Karg Island, then what? What happens after that? How do you maintain your control of Karg Island? What kind of military installations do we have to build there in order to protect our soldiers from incoming fire, which is to be expected? I mean, it's just not really well thought out. As a result of Trump's incompetency and disastrous war against Iran, we are losing support from some of our longtime European allies. Now, we've heard from Spain, which has refused to engage in this war, which has been very critical of Israel and the United States following the attack on Iran. But I want to focus a little bit on Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, because she has weighed in on this issue as well, and it's about to get pretty spicy. So actually, guys, you know what? Why don't we do this? Yeah, we got to take a break. I don't want to be late for our guest. So let's do the interview first, and then I'll continue with the rest of this story and the Meloni angle. Come right back.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney. We covered this story earlier, and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reform, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
I'm wearing one of our pieces of merchandise. So the funny thing about the Dragon Squad, and that's what our viewers call themselves. That's the name of the group, but every individual chooses their own name. You might have Cincinnati Dragon. You might have Harry Potter Dragon. We have a Grandma Sunshine Dragon is one of those that I remember. These are people that like to have an element of themselves, their lives, what's significant to them reflected as a part of the community. But the concept of the Dragon Squad is just something I threw away as a joke. I was mocking the Proud Boys, these like right-wing groups that come up with a name for themselves that they think is cool, but it's actually really lame. And I thought, off the top of my head, I can come up with something that's still kind of lame, but much cooler. And so I threw out Dragon Squad and I just moved on with my life. But everybody liked it, and so they kept it going, and so we've embraced it. And I think again, this was during the period of the pandemic. I think it was sort of nice to have a renewed sense of community, a feeling that you're a part of something when everything seems so chaotic. And as a result of that, we've got independent artists online streaming, making beautiful digital art of dragons. We've got, we've released a number of pieces of merchandise that people love sending us photos of them. And then, by the way, for me personally, people send me, like you can probably see in the background, like a knitted dragon someone sent me. There's a dragon book they sent me, dragon board games they send me. People have done like custom ironworks, making dragon bottle openers. Like the fans are super invested in diamond art and things like that. And so it's great that they send this stuff. Sometime we're gonna have to set up a wall of all of it. But yeah, it's definitely brought the community a lot closer together. The fact that we were no longer in this big studio, I felt a lot more personally attached to people. It felt very immediate. And I know that I personally needed the connection.
Welcome back to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And for our members and super chatters, I'll read your comments in a little bit. But for now, I think it's important to at least attempt to decipher what the United States is planning to do in regard to the ongoing war in the Middle East against Iran. And luckily, to help us kind of make sense of the nonsensical messaging we've been getting from the Trump administration is Professor Glenn Diesen, a political scientist and the host of the Glenn Diesen Show on YouTube, a show that I watch religiously and highly recommend. Professor Diesen, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and the kind introduction.
So I actually wanted to start off with some theoretical or philosophical questions because, if any of you in the audience have studied international relations, there are different theories. The theory of liberalism and there's the theory of realism. And when I was going to graduate school, the theory of realism really resonated with me, and I can tell it resonates with you as well. But there's something that I wanted to point to. I don't know if you would call it a flaw or maybe a weakness in realist IR, but it's this notion of rationality. Now, when you look at someone like President Donald Trump, who appears to be quite irrational, like invading Iran was irrational. Well, first, let me ask you, do you feel that it was irrational?
Yes, I think it wasn't based on sound intelligence, and the ideas hadn't really been scrutinized properly either. So I don't think that was rational. I think it could have been explained by ideology and also, of course, competing interests within the state.
Exactly. So competing interests within the state, corruption, the type of relationship the United States unfortunately has with Israel, that could lead to irrational decisions. So would that be considered a potential flaw in realist theory?
Yeah, it would, because, well, realist theory isn't really a foreign policy theory. This is something initially Kenneth Waltz was outlining. He was just saying that the international distribution of power is what creates incentives for how states should behave if they want to maximize their own security. But if you look more within the neoclassical realism, then they also look at the decision maker essentially as an intervening variable between the international distribution of power and foreign policy. So you can at times see that states could act irrationally. So, for example, at the end of the Soviet Union, you would have competition between Yeltsin and Gorbachev. So you would then they wouldn't act as a rational state because of this internal competition. So, but it is a weakness within political realism that is often ignored. I like the neoclassical realist approach simply because it allows for, looking at ideologies, institutional commitments, or political infighting, intelligence services, selling wars. I mean, there can be many things that essentially makes the state act less rational.
Since you brought up Kenneth Waltz, who I loved reading from, especially when it came to some of his more provocative writings, he's the one who popularized the whole notion of nuclear peace theory. So under the assumption that state actors are rational actors. And so the idea is nuclear proliferation doesn't necessarily mean that you live in a world that's less safe. The notion that everyone has a nuclear weapon and the use of a nuclear weapon will lead to mutually assured destruction actually leads to a peaceful world. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, within the realist theory, it's the assumption is that peace is created because there's a balance of power. So, nuclear weapons are the ultimate deterrent. So if you would look at why Russia and the United States never went to war, probably they would have if it wouldn't have been for that nuclear deterrent. So this is a very sound argument to make that this is nuclear peace. However, critics point out that the reason why it creates peace is because the level of destruction is elevated to such a high level that it's less likely that we'll go to war. But if we do go to war, that's pretty much the end of it. So it can be compared to huge military alliances. If the level of violence increases to a level where a country wouldn't want to go to war with NATO or a corresponding military alliance. However, if that war happens, then it will be all the more messy, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the war in Iran. So in an interview with Maria Bartiromo today, President Trump, actually it was last night, President Trump gave Americans the impression that he's wrapping things up in Iran. Let's take a quick look at that video, and I want to get your reaction to it.
Right now, you would have Iran with a nuclear weapon. And if they had a nuclear weapon, you would be calling everybody over there, sir. And you don't want to do that.
Well, you keep saying was. Is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country.
he says it's close to over as his administration, his Pentagon, is currently sending additional troops and military assets to the region. So what is your read on this? Is he just bluffing publicly while behind the scenes he's escalating? Or is he just sending military assets there just in case? What are your thoughts?
Well, it could be both. It could be that it's better to do negotiations if you have a powerful, military option that they could use if negotiations fail. But I suspect that that the diplomacy has not been very genuine, so it is not just that the weapons are being sent into the region, it's also how the ceasefire has been managed. For example, putting a naval blockade on Iran, an act of war, would be an escalation during this period, not just against Iran, but also spreading the conflict. This is effectively cutting off China, or intended to at least cut off China from Iranian oil. So it seems as if, it seems to me that it's trying to sell a war here by claiming that it's almost over, and the fact that there's been so many different objectives in this war. Whatever objective they're currently referring to can give certain indications. So, for example, if he's arguing that this is about nuclear weapons, I would feel a bit more reassured then, because the Iranians would be willing to make a deal about not acquiring nuclear weapons. They said they didn't want one. In the past, they made agreements which they accepted very intrusive inspections. So if he's talking about nuclear weapons, then we should be a little bit reassured. When he starts to talk about protests, then the issue then is regime change. And when you don't have a replacement government in the rear, a regime change essentially means the destruction of Iran. So follow the model of Syria, Libya, or even just balkanize the whole country along ethnic lines. So that's an existential threat to the Iranian. That's why they responded so fiercely in terms of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and doing this military bases. Otherwise, I just would add that one of the reasons why we never had why there was difficulty to make a nuclear deal was because Washington always linked the nuclear deal to other issues, be it reducing its conventional deterrence, that is missiles, drones, or cutting off itself from its regional partnerships, be it with Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas. And this is essentially impossible. This is a full capitulation, because if you want to destroy Iran, you want them to give up their conventional deterrent. And just as a side note, I would add, I don't think we should. I think forcing Iran to give up, forcing them to fear for their existence and forcing them to give up their conventional deterrence, I think that's a disaster, because that's the ultimate recipe for wanting a nuclear deterrent. If you can't rely on the conventional deterrent, then you definitely need a nuclear weapon. So I think this is the disaster of this war. Making the Iranians fear for their existence while demanding that we strip them off their conventional deterrent, it's not what you want to communicate.
Not only that, but also, Professor Diesen, people are talking about this war with the cover stories, right? And it really bothers me, because I want to be blunt, I want to be straight, and just talk about what the real goal is here. Now, the United States and Israel have two separate goals entirely. Actually, I don't even know what the United States genuinely wants here. I think Trump got goaded into this war, manipulated into it. I don't want to take his agency away. At the end of the day, he's the commander in chief, and he shouldn't have believed the Israelis. But nonetheless, he got sucked into this war. They put out a list of objectives. Obviously, regime change at this point seems like a fantasy, but this is a war that Israel wanted. And the reason why Israel does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon isn't because Israel is afraid that Iran is going to wipe them out with a nuke. Everyone is aware that Israel has a clandestine nuclear program. They're not part of the non-proliferation treaty, and in fact have threatened to use their nukes multiple times in this war alone. What Israel wants more than anything is to weaken Iran to the point where they are no longer a challenge to Israel's expansionist project. In fact, they talk about it openly in Israeli media. Just yesterday, I showed a video of an Israeli program where they're talking about wanting to spark a civil war in Lebanon in order to weaken it, and annex land in Lebanon. They would, and if you don't have Hezbollah, if you don't have to worry about Hezbollah, which is backed and armed by the Iranians, well, it's going to be easier to annex southern Lebanon as they're attempting to do right now. So the idea that Iran wouldn't be allowed to have ballistic missiles is insane. And when you look at Lebanon, if the Lebanese government genuinely wants to pursue disarming Hezbollah, that would also be insane. That would mean you are clearing the path for Israel to come in and take your country. That's my read of it. What do you think? Am I being hyperbolic?
No, I think that's exactly what they're going for, and I think a lot of this can be traced back to this clean break strategy of Israel since the 90s. Actually, it's an interesting strategy because it happened to emerge right after the Cold War when the US was unconstrained. The US thus also pursued a hegemonic policy where global primacy is what would create peace, not balancing interest with other powers. Now we saw in lieu of this, the same, and the Israeli beginning to embrace the same. In other words, they wouldn't anymore pursue diplomacy, compromise, any trade of land for peace. Instead, peace would be secured through dominance. With the US behind it, Israel could just defeat all its adversaries. Of course, the kingpin in the region is Iran, so that will be the final target to take out. So I think the desperation in Israel now is that they see that the international distribution of power is shifting. So for all these decades now, it never had to make any concessions, never had to make any compromises because he could always dictate the terms and it would always have the US behind it. Now, if you see that the distribution of power is shifting and the United States might not have the same presence there in the future, what you do, you have two options. You can either scale back and start to make a deal with your neighbors, or you can go all in and essentially knock out all your main rivals, then primarily the Iranians. So as a result, the Israelis bet everything on this, I think. So they're overstretched already. They have manpower problems, and this is going for taking out the adversary. And it's worth noting that in Lebanon, that Hezbollah was developed emerged in opposition to Israeli occupation. So the idea now that Lebanon should purge all of Hezbollah, help the Israelis, as Netanyahu suggested, and then Israel can just annex territories from Lebanon. It doesn't really make any sense at all. So it's hard to say where this is real or if it's disinformation, if they actually do have any cooperation with Lebanon on this issue. But it doesn't seem sustainable.
So you make a good point about the growing multipolarity of the international landscape, and that is something that Israel has to contend with, and the United States, especially as China is involved in this. China relies on Iran for a huge portion of its energy needs. China's not happy about this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that Trump announced, and at least today appears to be enforcing to some extent. And so there have been reports that China was providing Iran with radar systems, possibly weapons. What should our audience know about the involvement in China in this conflict?
Well, we don't know for certain how they're involved, but I'm guessing that they are providing intelligence, possibly at least. And it wouldn't surprise me some of these military flights, which have some of them had their corresponders shut off, which have landed in Iran, also brought some military equipment, especially air defenses, which were exhausted to some extent. So this is quite possible, and I think that the irony here is that I spoke recently with Joe Kent, and he was making the point that the victory or the successes in Venezuela might have given some hubris for the United States to engage in this military action. It doesn't make any sense because it's two completely different conflicts. But in relation to China, what's interesting is neither the Chinese or the Russians would do much in Venezuela because it's never a good idea to posture too much in a military manner in the backyard of another great power. But in Iran, this is crucial. Both the Russians and the Chinese see Iran as a very key strategic partner on the Eurasian continent. And if this would collapse, it would destabilize them as well. So neither the Chinese nor the Russians can afford to see Iran being destroyed. So they can play different roles. They can help to mediate, of course, put an end to this war if Trump feels he has got in too deep. But if the US will continue this war, they will find a way of assisting Iran. And I'm assuming that both the Chinese and the Russians have provided some intelligence and some weapons. And again, the Chinese consider themselves to be an ultimate target here. I saw Trump's tweet that the Chinese he's doing this for China, and it's getting weird.
Delusional.
Very delusional. But the point is that Chinese see themselves as being the target here. They've been launching an economic war against them. Now they're cutting them off from Iranian oil. I think the Chinese buy about 90% of the Iranian oil. And so overall they see themselves as being the target, and I would assume that they do give significant support. But it looks like both Trump and the Chinese have kind of the same. They're happy with this narrative because Trump would like, he can tell his followers that the Chinese do not supply any weapons, because we have a great relationship and they respect me. And the Chinese are also very happy with that messaging because they don't want any confrontation with the US, but they also can't accept that the US defeats Iran.
It's hard to predict how this is all going to play out. I wouldn't be able to predict, but I am curious whether you see this dragging out as a multi-year war, or if Trump is going to find a way to wrap things up and, spin some sort of narrative claiming that we are victorious. What are your thoughts?
Well, it looks like the narrative is going for is, we killed all their leaders, we destroyed their military, we destroyed their infrastructure. It's going to take decades to rebuild. This is winning, and we pack up and go home. And I think that's what he would have otherwise have done, because he doesn't want a long war. I think he likes the quick fixes. The problem is that the Iranians are still holding the Strait of Hormuz, which makes it difficult to go home and claim victory. Because as long as they hold the Strait of Hormuz, they can set up a toll, which they have, which they can collect reparations, especially from the Gulf states, to rebuild. They can also put pressures on the Gulf states if they want to, if they still want the reliable access through the Strait of Hormuz, then perhaps they should also then begin to expel the US military bases, which are used to attack Iran. And while they're at it, why not sell their oil in other currencies? So essentially dismantle the petrodollar, which links the US to the region. So they have a lot of reasons to hold on to this. And as long as they hold on to the Strait of Hormuz, then it's very difficult for Trump to declare victory. And the problem is he can't really dislodge them either. I mean, it's a very narrow strait, and the Iranians can launch missiles or drones from deep inside their own territory. So there's not much the US can do on this matter. And again, they can continue to, if they get too close, then the Iranians can hit the ships. So, and of course, the longer it goes on, the more Iran will also destroy among America's Gulf allies. And yes, they have interceptive missiles, but if you use $1 million interceptive missiles to intercept a $5,000 drone, time is not on your side anymore. And also there's limits to the industrial production to replenish the stocks. And I think all of these issues is why the war against Iran has been a bit of a surprise, because Iran has been able to go up that escalation ladder with the US the whole way. If US strikes energy fields in Iran, they will do the same to the Gulf states. And you see this tit for tat. So this is something different, I think, for the US, because they always had escalation dominance. They can bring it up to a certain level, and then the adversary would have to fold and capitulate. And they're not seeing this. The Iranians not giving up, essentially because they're willing to absorb any pain as they see this to be an existential threat. And that's the important part.
Yeah, it's the will for survival. And that's definitely informing their decisions. And I think that, unfortunately, our government has underestimated Iran for far too long, and now they're learning that lesson. Professor Glenn Diesen, thank you so much. I know it's very late where you are, so I appreciate you taking the time, and I hope you'll be back.
Oh, thanks so much. Anytime.
Talk to you soon. All right, everybody, we're going to take a brief break. I'll read some of your member comments when we come back from the break and more, so stick around. up, everyone? I hope you guys enjoyed that interview. Let me try to read as many comments as I can, starting with our Twitch community. We've got I'm wonderful. I love that. I'm wonderful 69 who says, I love Wednesdays. You're looking great, Anna. Keep up the amazing work. And thank you for being subscribed for 41 months. That's amazing. We've got a watch streak reached with Pagan Dragon, currently 5 stream streak, and says, love celebrating my birthday with TYT and getting the truth. Happy birthday. And thank you for watching on your birthday. That's amazing. We've got Robert Tables, who says Israel is becoming Nazi Germany. Wasn't on my 2026 bingo card, but here we are. I think it's important to tell the truth about how Israel is behaving. It's just wild to see these atrocities happen in real time. It really is, especially as an Armenian who heard stories about what happened to Armenians during the genocide. Seeing the same stuff happen now, it just makes me sick. That's it. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Anna Kasparian with you. And thank you to everybody who enjoyed that interview, including Scrondinger's Dragon, who says, great conversation with Professor Diesen. TYT talks to the best actors on a subject and asks the best questions, unlike corporate media. Thank you. I am so addicted to his show, Colonel Daniel Davis's show. Daniel Davis is so delightful. Like, he's the kind of person I would want to get a few beers with and spend hours talking about, the military and foreign policy and all of that stuff. Just a lovely, lovely man. Anyway, well, let's get back to what we were talking about prior to the interview, because I do think that one of the consequences that the United States is facing as a result of this war against Iran and our close relationship with Israel is that we're starting to really alienate ourselves from longstanding allies. And one of the allies I care about deeply, of course, is Italy, one of my favorite countries in the world. And things aren't going so well between Trump and Meloni. Let's get into it.
Do we still have the same relationship with Italy right now and Giorgia Meloni?
No. She's been negative. Anybody that turned us down for helping with this Iran situation, we do not have the same relationship.
Fascinating. That was President Donald Trump saying that he no longer has the same relationship with Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who has actually surprised me in recent months. She has implemented an arms embargo against Israel. Apparently, there are some Western allies who have a problem with things like genocide, for instance. And she's been deeply critical of this war that the United States and Israel started in Iran. Now, President Donald Trump is taking all sorts of jabs at Meloni, and he once considered her one of his closest allies. So Meloni's close relationship with Trump was already a liability in Italy. So let me be clear about that. The Italians are not fans of Trump, okay? Very deeply unpopular in Italy. And so being buddy-buddy with Trump as the prime minister of Italy, knowing that your people loathe him, not a good look. But the situation has only gotten worse since, gas prices have shot up as a consequence of this US-Israeli war against Iran. Meloni seized on an opportunity to extricate herself from a relationship that had grown domestically and internationally poisonous. After Trump launched a broadside on Monday against Pope Leo, Meloni rallied to the American pontiff's defense, saying, quote, I find President Trump's remarks about the Holy Father unacceptable. Now, Catholicism is practiced by the majority of Italians. In fact, if you've ever been to Italy, it's not hard to find, religious symbols all throughout the city or town. And so, of course, Italians would be very upset at the comments that Trump had made about Pope Leo. Then a clearly jilted Trump lashed out at Meloni, saying in an interview with an Italian paper that he hadn't talked to her in a very long time or in a long time, was vexed by her lack of participation in the war in Iran and was shocked by her, adding, "I thought she was brave, but I was wrong." Homeboy, she just implemented an arms embargo against Israel. She is brave. Okay, she is way braver than you are. Let me continue with his statement. "But I was wrong." He responded to her unacceptable criticism by snapping, "She's the one who's unacceptable." Wow, you really told her. So he then went on Fox News and said what he said, but the relationship between Trump and Meloni had been suffering a lot lately. So other examples, when Trump decided to attack Iran, he didn't even bother to give Meloni or any of our European allies for that matter a heads up. To her humiliation, her defense minister was vacationing in Dubai, United Arab Emirates at the time, and had to be evacuated via military jet. The war also led to a spike in gas and electricity prices in Italy, which of course is not going to make the people of Italy happy. And the fact that she wasn't even consulted, no one even spoke to her about the war before it started. Imagine how frustrating that is. The United States is supposed to be an ally. None of our European allies were informed of what our president was about to do. And then after he does it, after he starts a war with Iran, he demands that our NATO allies, our Western allies, the EU get involved and help clean up the mess that we started. How infuriating is that? And so if you look at some of the behavior of other allies, like Spain, for instance, Spain is now trying to make deals with China. How does this benefit us? This war, jeopardized oil for India, another ally of ours. By the way, the Indian government, not necessarily the Indian people, but the Indian government, tremendously supportive of Israel. How is that working out for you? But let me continue with the rest. So Meloni started to speak out against some of the decisions that the United States government and Trump in particular has been making. I am concerned, obviously, because it would be stupid to believe that what happens even far from our borders does not involve us, she said on March 2nd, adding the United States and Israel decided to attack without the involvement of their European partners. And that's just true. It's demonstrably true. She even had her defense minister declare that what the United States and Israel are doing certainly happened outside the rules of international law. And on top of that, this week she announced that Italy would not automatically renew its defense agreement with Israel in view of the current situation. Prior to that, she actually had stopped sending weapons to Israel as a result of their barbaric activity in Gaza, the West Bank, now Lebanon and Iran. Certainly other countries, but not to the same extent. And I welcome that. I think it's really, really important for world leaders, especially world leaders in countries that are supposed to be democracies, that are supposed to believe in liberal democracy, to speak out against barbarism, to speak out against genocide, and to do more than just speak out, to actually put some action behind those words. So look, Meloni might have some views that I disagree with, but when it comes to her handling of Israel, when it comes to her response to President Trump and his pressure to, suck our European allies into a disastrous war that wouldn't benefit them in any way, shape, or form, I think she's doing the right thing. What I'm sad about, though, is that the United States has decided to alienate itself from longstanding allies and cozy up even further with Israel, which gives us nothing. No, worse than nothing. Drags us into wars, sucks up our money, and unfortunately makes us complicit in war crimes and genocide. Can we just side with Spain instead, like with almost any other country? Anyway, all right. Well, let's talk about the energy crisis with some more detail, because definitely is a crisis already. But if this war continues, it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah, this inflation number coming in, the media was painting it all wrong, saying it was a terrible inflation report. No, the core inflation number, which is what the Fed looks at as
strips out food and energy.
Yeah, but that's what the Fed looks at, and that's what they raise or lower rates based on.
I gotcha.
It was lower than expectations, so it was actually a pretty good inflation report.
This thing wraps up within the next 2 or 3 weeks. I think this will be a flash, cost spike. That was worth it because we're going to get something I call the peace dividend. That's going to be a multi-decade, great Pax Americana for all of the world.
Inflation was 4% in March. You felt it. I felt it. We all felt it. 4% in March. And it's going to keep going up despite the cope that we just heard from various Fox News anchors. That was embarrassing. That was embarrassing. If Biden were the president right now, is that the kind of commentary that we would hear from Fox News? Oh, the report says inflation is 4%, but that's actually a good thing. That's actually a good thing. Let's talk about the peace dividend. What peace dividend? The war against Iran has led to the complete destruction of oil and gas infrastructure that will literally take years and years to rebuild. What is you doing? Like, what are you talking about? Even if the war ended today, it's going to take years for prices to come down if it ended today. But Fox News actually would like to see the war keep going. So I would like them to explain to me, as more and more energy infrastructure gets destroyed in the Gulf, as the Strait of Hormuz is blocked by now, I guess, the United States, as the Houthis and Iran respond to that by blocking the Red Sea, at least transit through the Red Sea. How is this a good thing? And when are we going to expect that peace dividend? These people think you're stupid. And you should find that insulting. But while Americans are paying more at the pump, big oil, those companies, they're making out like bandits. They might love this war, actually. So let me give you the details on that. So there's a stunning new analysis in The Guardian. And here's what they claim. The world's top 100 oil and gas companies banked more than $30 million every hour in unearned profits in the first month of the US-Israeli war in Iran. Okay, not every day. 30 million every hour. Yeah. So during the month of March, the average price for a barrel of oil was around $100. And just for context's sake, prior to the war popping off, the fact of the matter is the average was around $70, $73, I believe, right before the war started. But thanks to Trump and Netanyahu's war of choice, which is looking more and more like a quagmire, the biggest oil companies and gas companies, by the way, made $23 billion in windfall profits. That's just in profits. And if the price of oil remains as high as it is, those companies stand to make a lot more money. So there is a possibility, given how corrupt our political system is, that oil and gas lobbyists are hitting up Trump and egging him on to keep this war going longer. I wouldn't be surprised. That's my speculation. But they love their profits. And if they see an opportunity to make more profits, yeah, sure, bomb more people, kill more civilians, keep this war going. So The Guardian estimated just how much in extra profit the top 100 companies would make if the price of oil remains at $100 a barrel for the rest of 2026. So it is likely that the price per barrel is actually going to go up higher than that. But let's just assume it stays at $100 a barrel for the rest of 2026. How much money are these companies going to make? So Saudi Aramco, the state-owned Saudi Arabian oil company, would make over $25 billion in extra profits, just extra profits. Rounding out the top five are Kuwait Petroleum Corporation at $12 billion in extra profits, ExxonMobil with $11 billion in extra profits, Gazprom at $10.8 billion in extra profits, and then you have Chevron. Oh, poor Chevron. They're at the bottom of the top five with just $9.2 billion in extra profits. Gazprom is worth dwelling on for a moment because it is a Russian oil company. It is. Ukraine can't be happy because the fact of the matter is we have lifted sanctions on both Iranian oil and Russian oil in order to increase the oil supply to kind of keep the price under control, okay? As a result, Putin and Russia flush with cash. Okay, so let me read it to you. According to the analysis by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, here's what they found. The conflict has benefited Vladimir Putin's treasure chest, with Russia receiving oil export revenues of $840 million a day in March. That's 50% higher than in February. Just think about the hundreds of billions of dollars in military aid we sent to Ukraine to try to fight off Russia. And now we are, because of this war that we started against Iran, Russia is also making out like bandits, just like the other oil companies are. And so the American companies in the top 10 are ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Shell. Chevron's chief executive, a gentleman by the name of Mike Wirth, sold $104 million worth of Chevron shares between January and March. I mean, he might have been better off holding on to those shares because they're probably going to increase in price. And keep in mind that so far, when it comes to all these big oil companies, we've been telling you about the fact that this is just extra profits. This isn't like, oh, a little bit of a bump. No, all of this money is profit on top of the money they were already making. And so they were already making a ton of money, hand over fist. The oil and gas sector has made an average of 11 trillion. I'm sorry, is that 11 or 1? Sorry, guys, I'm a little bit blind. Okay, so the oil and gas sector has made an average of 1 trillion a year in pure profit every year. The fossil fuel sector also benefits from explicit subsidies that totaled 1.3 trillion in 2022, according to the International Monetary Fund. And so it is a problem when a disastrous war is a money-making opportunity, a price gouging opportunity by the fossil fuel companies. And it's not going to change anytime soon. The people who suffer are, of course, number one, all of the civilians who are killed, all the people whose countries have been bombed to smithereens. And there's that silver lining, though. And that silver lining is that the wealthiest, most prosperous corporations and companies across the globe make money off of all of that suffering as a result of all that suffering, as a result of all that war. The US is shipping a lot of oil around the world. In fact, we had been doing that even prior to the war. We are the #1 exporter of fossil fuels. I think most people are unaware of that, but it's true. We do not have nationalized oil or gas. So when people talk about how America is energy independent, that doesn't quite make sense. We don't have nationalized, fossil fuels. So private companies get to sell to the highest bidder. That's how it works. And we do export a lot of our oil and gas. The US became a net exporter of gasoline in the 2010s under Obama, and the world's largest exporter of motor gasoline in 2024. Luckily, though, Khanna is offering, it comes across as Khanna offering a solution, and who knows, maybe that's what his intention is. But by doing this, he is raising awareness to the big lie that we've been sold by Democrats and Republicans for many years. This whole idea that we're energy independent because we're drilling more. Drill, baby, drill. Americans are going to be better off. Do we look better off, or do oil and gas companies look better off? So here's what Khanna said. He told The Guardian that Americans don't want another costly war. They want good jobs at home and people abroad. Gas prices are going up and companies are driving up costs. We should be focused on competing with China and investing in American manufacturing, not spending $1 billion a day in this war. I agree with him wholeheartedly. And, his solution is banning gasoline exports to other countries, which is kind of like nationalizing our gas, no? It's not going to happen, but the only way to keep prices down specifically for Americans would be to take control of the fossil fuels. That's not going to happen. And I think it's actually important for Americans to see the consequences of Trump's war in Iran, to really feel it. I don't want people struggling, but it's important for Americans to know that just because you spend $1 trillion a year on your military doesn't mean you need to go around starting wars, especially on behalf of a belligerent pariah state like Israel. These are the consequences. So you need to make a decision. Do we maintain our alliance with a country that doesn't respect us and sucks the life out of us and keeps pushing us into disastrous economic situations, disastrous conflicts on top of that? Or do we want to, I don't know, maybe reconsider whether it makes more sense to focus on ourselves and making our country better and continuing alliances with longstanding, friends of ours who have helped us. It's a 50-50 thing. You give and take. I don't see a lot of giving from Israel, but I do see a lot of taking. Anyway, we got to take a break. When we come back for the second hour, we'll talk a little bit about the latest statements coming from various Israeli operatives and politicians meant to stir up some drama with Turkey. So is Turkey next? Come back, I'll tell you.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney. We covered this story earlier, and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reform, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
I'm wearing one of our pieces of merchandise. So the funny thing about the Dragon Squad, and that's what our viewers call themselves. That's the name of the group, but every individual chooses their own name. You might have Cincinnati Dragon. You might have Harry Potter Dragon. We have a Grandma Sunshine Dragon is one of those that I remember. These are people that like to have an element of themselves, their lives, what's significant to them reflected as a part of the community. But the concept of the Dragon Squad is just something I threw away as a joke. I was mocking the Proud Boys, these like right-wing groups that come up with a name for themselves that they think is cool, but it's actually really lame. And I thought, off the top of my head, I can come up with something that's still kind of lame, but much cooler. And so I threw out Dragon Squad and I just moved on with my life. But everybody liked it, and so they kept it going, and so we've embraced it. And I think again, this was during the period of the pandemic. I think it was sort of nice to have a renewed sense of community, a feeling that you're a part of something when everything seems so chaotic. And as a result of that, we've got independent artists online streaming, making beautiful digital art of dragons. We've got, we've released a number of pieces of merchandise that people love sending us photos of them. And then by the way, for me personally, people send me, like you can probably see in the background, like custom ironworks making dragon bottle openers. Like the fans are super invested in diamond art and things like that. And so it's great that they send this stuff. Sometime we're gonna have to set up a wall of all of it. But yeah, it's definitely brought the community a lot closer together. The fact that we were no longer in this big studio, I felt a lot more personally attached to people. It felt very immediate. And I know that I personally needed the connection.
Turkey.
Ice cream.
All right, let's put the Cook Unity graphic up so I can read this. Sick of cooking the same meals over and over, running out of time in your schedule to slog hours in the kitchen? Let's get chefs at Cook Unity. Let the chefs at Cook Unity, look, just listen, we're all busy. We don't have time, okay? You don't have time to go to the grocery store and figure out like which ingredients you need or how much of the ingredients you need to make dinner. So Cook Unity makes it easy. It's simple. If you want to learn more, go to cookunity.com/TYT. Easiest thing in the world. You get 50% off your first order. It's freaking fantastic. You're gonna love it. Let's get to the news. So I wanted to do an update on oh, by the way, if you want to learn more, 50% off your order, you have to use a specific code, TYT at checkout, or you can go directly to cookunity.com/TYT. Okay, let's get to the details. Love live reads. I live for them. Let's talk about Turkey.
A new Turkish threat is emerging. I want to be very clear. Turkey and Qatar have gained influence in Syria, are seeking influence elsewhere and everywhere throughout the region. And from here, I warn, Turkey is the new Iran.
Israeli politician Naftali Bennett, the guy who's supposed to be the opposition to Netanyahu. Well, he was kind enough to let his pay pigs here in the United States know which war Israel's gonna drag us into next. Because the propaganda against Turkey has begun. So pretty soon, I'm sure we're going to be hearing about how Turkey is, building dangerous weapons of mass destruction, and we must go in and attack them immediately. This is a disaster, but it didn't just stop with Naftali Bennett. I'm going to get into all the various claims that are being made by various Israeli individuals, including some who work as operatives here in the United States, meant to kick Turkey out of NATO, which would then justify the US attacking them because they're no longer a NATO ally. That's the whole point here. So things have definitely escalated. Turkish President Erdogan called out Israel's desperate attempts to torpedo the very fragile ceasefire between Iran and the United States. It's supposed to last until the 22nd, April 22nd. And while Trump's administration says that they're not seeking an extension of this 2-week ceasefire, Erdogan says that Turkey will be pushing for the truce to last longer to ensure that peace negotiations can continue. So look, I am not a fan of the Turkish government, but you're telling me that the guy who wants the ceasefire to last longer so peace negotiations can continue is the real threat? Okay. So, Erdogan says the following, and he hasn't been holding back lately. The real question is he just paying lip service to the people of Turkey who are furious over Israel's shenanigans lately? Or does he actually mean it? Because here's what he says. If there is to be peace in our region, it will be despite the Zionist regime. If stability is achieved, it will again be despite the Israeli government. And I actually agree with him on that. But let's actually back up a little bit to understand how Israel began to sour on Turkey in the first place. So after the October 2023 attacks on Israel and how they responded to those attacks, basically Turkey suspended all trade with Israel and they even closed their airspace to Israel. So already we see a a relationship that's kind of falling apart, if there was even much of a relationship to begin with. Now, they were peaceful with one another, but Turkey sees what's going on and they decide, no, we don't agree with this. We're gonna close our airspace and we're gonna ban trade with Israel. And as one can imagine, Netanyahu wasn't so happy about it. Okay, so here's a post from Netanyahu just a few days ago, April 11th, 2026. Israel under my leadership will continue to fight Iran's terror regime and its proxies, unlike Erdogan, who accommodates them and massacred his own Kurdish citizens. And that's when things got even spicier, okay? So Turkey's foreign ministry described Benjamin Netanyahu as the Hitler of our time. True. Responding to a post on X by Israel's prime minister accusing Erdogan of cooperating with Iran and massacring the Kurdish people. Now, from my understanding, the Turkish government has not been particularly kind to the Kurds. I'll give you a specific example. So in Syria, during Trump's first term, he had a phone call with Erdogan. Erdogan wanted to pull US troops out of a region of Syria where the Kurds were fighting alongside the US, in an effort to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. For whatever reason, Trump listened and the Kurds were slaughtered. The Turks came in and they slaughtered the Kurds. That did happen. No, the Kurds have carried out acts of violence against the Turks as well. So I don't want to simplify this complicated issue, but I want to be fair and honest. And so when it comes to the Turks and the relationship that they have with the Kurds, it hasn't been all friendly. It hasn't been hunky-dory. And what we're hearing from the Israelis here isn't a complete lie. However, just stick with me because you are about to hear some pretty big lies from the Israelis. So in response to that, the Jerusalem Post puts this piece out saying that Turkish President Erdogan on Sunday accused Israel of carrying out atrocities against Palestine and Lebanon and threatened potential military action against the Jewish state, similar to its past interventions in Karabakh and Libya. Let's talk about Karabakh, Israel. Let's talk about Karabakh. They're talking about Nagorno-Karabakh, which of course was ethnically cleansed of Armenians recently, thanks to the weaponry that Israel provided Azerbaijan, which did the ethnic cleansing. So spare me your BS concern of the people of Karabakh. Funny how you didn't mention anything in there about the Armenians that were ethnically cleansed thanks to your weapons. Disgusting pieces of crap. Anyway, and then they mentioned Libya. Doesn't Israel love what happened in Libya? Didn't they want a failed state in Libya, which is exactly what they got? Obama was stupid enough to put American boots on the ground to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, and now you have a failed state that engages in the slave trade. But hey, no one in Libya is a friend of Iran's anymore, so Israel's happy. I just love that they're positioning themselves as the good guys. Come on, please. Anyway, but the post came with a community note that I wanted to share with you as all. They did clarify when Erdogan had made that comment. So it turns out that Erdogan didn't make that comment recently. The comment about threatening military action against Israel or the Jewish state. Apparently he had made that quote July 28th of 2024. And for whatever reason, the Jerusalem Post has recycled it and given people the false impression that Erdogan made that comment recently. Why did they do that? Is it because they're trying to ratchet up tensions with Turkey and maybe pull them into this war? Get the United States to go to war with Turkey? Well, what is that about? Pretty sick. Of course, that didn't stop loony Laura Loomer from using this disinformation against Turkey to call for their demise. Let me give you an example. She says, time for Turkey to be kicked out of NATO. Erdogan is threatening to attack Israel. But everyone who has been paying attention knows Erdogan has been utilizing Turkish military forces to provide support to Hamas terrorists and provide military training to Jelani's ISIS forces in Syria for the purpose of invading Israel from the Gaza border. Hold on. So the Al-Qaeda terrorist, who's now the leader in Syria, thanks to the dirty work of the Israelis and the United States is now suddenly bad for Israel? Isn't Israel elated over the fact that they destroyed Syria? We funded, or I shouldn't say funded, we armed under the Obama administration al-Nusra terrorists, which is an offshoot from Al-Qaeda. And that's how you get someone like Jelani, again, a so-called former Al-Qaeda terrorist, as the new leader of Syria. But he doesn't get along with Iran. Bashar al-Assad did. So we had to do something about that, right, Laura? Further, she says Erdogan is a lunatic jihadist and Turkey should not be allowed to purchase F-35 fighter jets from the United States. She, mentioned in there that, Turkey helped ISIS. My understanding is that Turkey also fought ISIS. But let's talk about ISIS. Let's talk about the formation of ISIS, because we didn't hear a damn thing about ISIS. And then suddenly ISIS all over the news. A terrorist group that belongs in Islamic Jihad, totally like devout, hardcore, extremist Muslims. That's what they are, right? Yet the only people they ever attack are Muslims? Weird. I've been doing some digging into ISIS because I'm realizing more and more that the narratives that we've been fed by our pathetic media is not really the full picture of how ISIS was formed and how ISIS has been utilized for Israel's purposes. What do I mean by that? Well, I turn to Whitney Webb's reporting from September of 2017. So journalist Whitney Webb wrote a pretty incredible piece. This was in Mint Press News. And here's what she found just by reading Israeli media and knowing what they're saying. There has long been speculation regarding ties between the Israeli government and the terror group Daesh. So Daesh is ISIS. That's the, I guess, other way of saying it. But since I have a hard time pronouncing it, every time you see Daesh, I'm gonna say ISIS, okay? Otherwise known as the Islamic State. Such speculation has been fueled by Israel's reference to ISIS as a useful tool and its acknowledgement that it views a Syria under complete ISIS control as preferable to the continuation of the current Syrian government. So this was when Bashar al-Assad was still in power. So they thought ISIS would be a better alternative to Bashar al-Assad. So Laura Loomer, what are your thoughts on that? Put it in your pipe, homegirl, and smoke it. This is what you guys wanted. You got it. You should be celebrating. According to a report from the Israeli website, Inian Merkazi and Abna News Agency, Libyan security forces arrested an ISIS commander in the city of Benghazi, only to find out soon after that the man they had captured, Ibrahim Benjamin, was also an agent of Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. Benjamin, who was known in Libya as Abu Hafs, had begun work in Libya after 2011 NATO-led invasion of Libya had ousted former leader Muammar Gaddafi. You see how sick these people are? You see how sick they are? They create terrorist groups and then they cry about the terrorist groups and talk about how they are victims of these terrorist groups and the United States must defeat them. Here's more from Whitney Webb's reporting. Again, this is from September 12th, 2017, Mint Press News. Given that Israel has repeatedly stated it does not want ISIS to be defeated, it is clear that Benjamin, right, that's the Mossad agent, who allegedly commanded hundreds of men in ISIS, was not gathering intelligence in order to defeat ISIS, but rather to strengthen it. In the case of Syria, ISIS was seen as a covert means of overthrowing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, an event that Israeli intelligence believed would result in Iran's loss of its only ally in the region. So please spare me, Loomer, about your fears that Turkey is strengthening ISIS. Okay, your people created and strengthened ISIS. That is my theory here. Anyway, Israel sure loves to do things like fund Hamas, manufacture terrorist groups. So we all get scared by the boogeyman that they themselves created. Back to Turkey. Israeli politician Naftali Bennett continued evoking war by, telling the press that Turkey is Israel's new threat. Take a look.
Let me just ask you whether there's a risk of further confrontation with Turkey based on comments that you've said in the past.
Well, we need to ensure that Erdogan doesn't create a new alliance of radical Islam Sunni version, meaning an axis between himself, Julani, Qatar, and Hamas. We've been facing for many decades the Shiite radical Islam, and I hope that Turkey doesn't choose to foment terror and Islamism in its power.
Israel has a problem with Sunni Muslims, like Palestinians, Shia Muslims, like the Iranians. I mean, they seem to have problems with Christians too, because they be bombing churches left and right. There's no question about that. How many Christians have been killed in Lebanon as a result of Israeli aggression? Do they get along with anybody? Do they get along with anyone? Iran shares a border with Armenia, a Christian nation. And they have had friendly relations. And in fact, Iran happens to be one of Armenia's main trading partners. How does a Christian nation get along with such a scary Muslim country? I don't know. It's weird. So weird. Anyway, just a few days ago on Monday, the Turkish foreign minister said the following, and I agree with this wholeheartedly. Israel cannot live without an enemy, and its government is now trying to portray Turkey as one. Further upsetting the Israelis, Istanbul's chief prosecutor announced that an indictment had been filed against 35 Israelis, including Netanyahu, over the naval interception of dozens of vessels carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza in late September and early October 2025. Among other things, they were charged with crimes against humanity, genocide, torture, and unlawful deprivation of liberty relating to the interception. So things are heating up between Israel and Turkey. The real question is, will the American people fight like hell to prevent the United States from getting dragged into a war with Turkey? Because it really does look like Israel is setting the stage for that to come next. And I don't want to go to war with Turkey. I think that would be stupid. So we need to start thinking about this. We need to start thinking about how we're going to resist this. And more importantly, the number one goal should be decoupling from Israel. We'll be right back. What's up, everyone? All right, I'm going to try to read as many of these as I can. In Liberty and Guns We Trust, Anna, what are your thoughts on Dan Bilzerian? He's going up against Randy Fine. He won an Anti-Semite of the Year nomination, so he must be pretty good. I really wish I don't agree with some of his rhetoric. I think that some of his analysis in regard to Israel is totally spot on. I hate Randy Fine. I despise and loathe Randy Fine. I also really don't like when people, engage in this, it's not Israel, it's the Jews commentary. I think that it's not only wrong and it directs hatred toward Jewish people overall. And there's so many wonderful Jewish people, they don't deserve hate and they don't agree with what's going on. But more importantly, it totally weakens your message. Like, why? Why do that? Why do that? Why not be laser focused on what the real problem is? So, look, we'll see how that race goes, but yeah. Anyway, like his criticism of Israel is correct. It's just he slips into some rhetoric that's very ineffective and makes people not want to listen to what he has to say. So he's hurting others, but more importantly for him, he's hurting himself. Anthony writes in and says, Anna, what's your opinion on the Eric Swalwell situation? Look, I don't know whether or not he actually committed any, Anthony in our super chats asked, what is your opinion on the Eric Swalwell situation? Obviously, I can't know whether or not he actually committed any type of sexual violence or misconduct. What I do know is that he did stuff that he could get blackmailed on, clearly at a bare minimum. So like, listen, if you want to be a politician because you want to be a public servant and actually be effective at your job, if you're a pervy wanker, stay home. Stay home. Go to school, go to a trade school, be a plumber. I don't care. Just stay the hell out of politics. If you are so H that you can't keep it in your pants and some unknown entity is going to have blackmail on you, you are a problem. Stay away. Stay away. Be gone. Okay, that's what I think. Eric Swalwell was a typical ineffective corporate Democrat. He had his, pro-Israel placard on his office door. I've got no love for him. I've got no use for him. But generally speaking, I'm so sick of these perverted politicians getting elected and effing everything up. That's what I think about it. So, and by the way, isn't he married? What is going on here? Let me tell you something. My husband wanted to get elected into Congress. I'm tying his ass up. He's gonna live in the basement. Okay, you're not going to Washington. There's no way. Luckily, he's not into politics like that, so I don't have to worry about it. Anyway, let's get to our next story. Let's talk a little bit about that insane piece that was published in the Wall Street Journal about, the scams that it appears Trump's kids are involved in. Let's get into it. Eric Trump and Don Jr. are facing some pretty serious accusations of ripping off crypto investors. Look, let me just pause already. There are no good guys in this story, so there's no one to root for. So just let that go. Now I'll continue. They're being accused by a man who seemingly paid off the Trumps to escape prosecution by the Securities and Exchange Commission. But the stage is set for an all-out brawl involving the Trump kids. And remember, there are no good guys here, and there's no honor among thieves. So let's get to these details. The man accusing Trump's sons of ripping off investors is a gentleman by the name of Justin Sun. He himself is a crypto investor. Now, previously, Sun worked overtime to earn the favor of both Eric Trump and Don Jr. When Eric and Don launched their cryptocurrency firm, Liberty Financial, in 2024, the initial fundraising really wasn't off to a great start. But since Justin Sun wanted to, win a little bit of love from the Trump brothers, he saw this as an opportunity and decided to invest in Liberty Financial. Okay, so he went all in on Liberty Financial, investing $30 million and becoming its biggest publicly known investor. His endorsement sent money flooding in from other investors, propelling World Liberty to $550 million in total sales by the conclusion of its fundraising. Sun ultimately purchased at least $75 million in tokens. So he was the largest public investor in Trump's meme coin, but wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you know it? After he became the biggest investor in Trump's meme coin, The Securities and Exchange Commission charged Sun in 2023 with fraud over crypto trades and illicit promotion. But then, after he did that investment, in March, the case was dismissed after he agreed to pay a $10 million fine. Okay, so they settled it without a lengthy trial or anything like that. It seems like some strings might have been pulled, but the story doesn't end there. In fact, it's about to get a lot more juicy. I want you to remember Sam Bankman-Fried and what he got prosecuted for, and decide for yourselves whether these allegations sound eerily similar to what Sam Bankman-Fried did. So for months, Sun has accused World Liberty Financial of basically ripping off its investors. So this fight just exploded into the open with like name calling and legal threats galore. When Justin Sun invested in World Liberty, he actually bought millions of dollars worth of the firm's tokens, right? But now he's alleging that World Liberty is preventing him from being able to sell his tokens. They're like, nope, not so fast. So in other words, he doesn't have access to his own resource here, something he invested in. So World Liberty Financial pledged its own tokens, according to the Wall Street Journal. This is bad. Pledged its own tokens as collateral to borrow more than $75 million in stable coins from Dolomite, which is a lending platform founded by World Liberty's chief technology officer. Is there self-dealing going on? And more importantly, are they using the money from investors as their own piggy bank? And this is bad news for Sun and his investment. According to analysis by the blockchain tracking group Bubble Maps, the value of his holdings the value of the holdings Sun has allegedly been unable to move has declined by more than $80 million to about 43 million. Retail traders have reported that they also were blocked from being able to sell their tokens as well. And then on Sunday, Sun wrote this on X. I have always been an ardent supporter of President Trump and his crypto-friendly policy. As an early supporter who invested heavily in World Liberty Financial, I did so because I believed in the vision that was presented to the public. A decentralized finance platform that would promote financial freedom, remove intermediaries, and bring the benefits of DeFi to mainstream Americans. What was never disclosed to me or any investor is that World Liberty embedded a backdoor blacklisting function in the smart contract used to deploy World Liberty Financial tokens. This function gives the company unilateral power to freeze, restrict, and effectively confiscate the property rights of any token holder without notice, without cause, and without recourse. This is the opposite of decentralization. This is a trap door marked as an open door. So Sun even accused World Liberty of using the crypto community and their investments into World Liberty as their personal ATM. And in response, World Liberty's X account posted the following. Let's take a quick look at this. This is their explanation or response. Does anyone still believe Justin Sun? Justin's favorite move is playing the victim while making baseless allegations to cover up his own misconduct. Same playbook, different target. World Liberty Financial isn't the first. We have the contracts, we have the evidence, we have the truth. See you in court, pal. I hate everybody in this story. So do I trust the Trump brothers? Of course not. And look, it could be true that they put in a sneaky little clause in the contract that gives them the power to just confiscate the money and use it as collateral for other loans. It looks like that's what's going on here. But time will tell. I mean, this is just my speculation. They do need to adjudicate this in court. But in the meantime, President Donald Trump is doing very well for himself. World Liberty's governing document says a Trump family-owned company has the rights to 75% of revenues from token sales after operating expenses are deducted. On his 2025 financial disclosure form, Trump listed more than $57 million in income from World Liberty. So if Sun is telling the truth, if things are really playing out the way he claims things are playing out, basically this is all a scheme to funnel investor money in crypto straight to Trump's pocket. Not good. Now I can kind of understand why the crypto community has been turning on Trump lately. This could be a major factor, but we're gonna have to wait and see. Hopefully it does go to court, and I really want to know what's going on here. But great report in the Wall Street Journal of all places. You guys should read the whole thing for yourselves. For now, let's take our final break and we'll come back with more news. What's up, everybody? All right, we've got Chrono Hop, who says, no more bombing children with tax dollars. Our politicians do not represent us. No taxation without representation. Hear, hear. You know, I agree with that message. William Caldwell writes in and says, have we now learned that once inflation starts, it's here to stay? This will not end well for the American people. You're right about that. Before the war started, I booked, because last year was such a devastating year for me. I wasn't really able to travel. I was working like crazy, taking care of my mom, trying to make sure that she survived cancer. I didn't do anything fun really last year. So as soon as the new year hit, I was like, I'm booking a trip to Europe. So I booked the trip and now I regret it because I don't want to be spending money on a trip to Europe. And I can't get things canceled. They're not giving me refunds. I hate Trump so much, so much. Anyway, Dav Mill says, Thomas Jefferson, if the press published the truth, it would be by accident. Mark Twain, those who read the paper are misinformed. Malcolm X, the press would have you cheering for the oppressors and against the oppressed. I think the real challenge is finding the independent voices who want to tell the truth, but they exist. Whitney Webb is one of them. Special thanks to Nader Studio for the gifted sub. We appreciate your support. I want to read one more comment from Mondo Lastraca, who says, by the way, I just subscribed to Diesen's channel. I know he's conservative, but I want to check him out. Trust me, our understanding of domestic politics and how conservatism affects that has no bearing on his content. He talks about international relations, and I think you're going to agree with a lot of what he has to say. Not only is he fantastic, the guests he has on his program are also fantastic. So I highly recommend. Anyway, all right, let's get to our next story. Let's talk about JD Vance's great time last night.
Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. Whoever yelled that out from the dark, he certainly does not. I think that's pretty easy. I think that's a pretty easy principle.
Man, Vice President JD Vance had a tough time at a Turning Point USA event that he attended last night. Now, turns out that Charlie Kirk was absolutely right in pointing out the young conservatives, especially young conservative men, who are absolutely sick of the endless forever wars, who want to get out of the Middle East, who understand just how detrimental the US alliance with Israel is. And you see it play out during this entire event. It's amazing. And I love to see it, especially because these are people who see right through the BS narrative that JD Vance is a peacenik, that he doesn't believe in these forever wars, that he doesn't believe in using military force when it makes no sense to do so. All we've seen from JD Vance is a defense of anything and everything Trump has gotten involved in the Middle East. So something to keep in mind. Now, the confrontation between Vance and an audience member came as Vance was asked to basically comment again on the growing feud between the White House and the Vatican. Now, if you guys can remember, Trump had some nasty things to say about Pope Leo because Pope Leo expressed that he is not supportive of this war against Iran. And for some reason, the White House thinks the Pope is the bad guy for not wanting peace, for not wanting war and wanting peace instead. But during his appearance, Vance took the opportunity to try and, I guess, mansplain theology to the Pope, which I'm sure worked out real well for him. Let's take a look at that.
So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm gonna try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. Whoever yelled that out from the dark, he certainly does not. I think that's pretty easy. I think that's a pretty easy principle. Okay, so here's a guy. Let me just say this. This is a guy. No. First of all, random dude who's shouting. Can I finish my point and then I'll respond to what you just shouted? Is that okay?
That was so good. I might want to watch it again. So just hold. Thank you. Thank you to the audience members who are calling out the BS. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the fact that you care about the truth. And more importantly, I appreciate that you're not full of crap when it comes to valuing human life. Because I was led to believe that conservatives pretend to care about the value of human life when it comes to banning abortion, but then a lot of them went on to act poorly in ways that made it clear to me that they don't value human lives, especially when they engage in these wars that kill a lot of innocent people. But for the individuals in the audience who are speaking out and they're holding this administration's feet to the fire, thank you. You deserve credit for that. I don't care that you're on the right. The fact that you're doing the right thing in that moment deserves flowers. Okay. So the audience was correct. It is not justified to wield your sword to slaughter innocent people, okay, and steal their land, which is what Israel is doing with our help, with our weapons, with our money, making us complicit in these crimes. There's nothing noble about what Israel is doing. So the idea that wielding the sword is being done for good in this case is laughable and insulting. Then Vance goes on to provide cover for Israel's war crimes while shifting the blame on the Biden administration. Let's watch.
To respond to this guy here, he said, I believe he said the administration supports a genocide in Gaza. And here's my response to that. When we came in, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was an absolute catastrophe. You know who's the person who got a peace agreement in Gaza? Donald J. Trump. So if you want to complain about what happened in Gaza, so if you want, sir, to complain about what happened in Gaza, why don't you complain about Joe Biden and the last administration? We're the administration that solved that problem.
You think there's peace in Gaza? The IDF is currently occupying 53% of that territory, which was already densely populated after the Nakba, where 700,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from Israel into the Gaza Strip. You think there's peace in Gaza? Let's talk about the peace that Trump accomplished in Gaza, okay? I want to show you what peace looks like for these demonic monsters. Okay, this is a headline from this morning. This is a headline from this morning. Israel attacks kill 11, including 2 children, in day of strikes on Gaza. Is that peace? Is that what a ceasefire looks like? Well, for the Israelis, that's what a ceasefire looks like. They've never followed through with a ceasefire if their life depended on it. I mean, if Israelis aren't bombing, what are they good for, right? That's all they do. That's peace? A 3-year-old and a 14-year-old were among those killed in Israel's latest strikes in northern Gaza. That's peace? And all the ridiculous seals clapping in the audience, please read. Stop taking what these clowns are saying at face value. They're lying to you. This is just the latest violation, by the way, of the ceasefire. Despite a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that began last October and slowed 2 years of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, Israeli forces continue to carry out daily strikes on the territory, killing almost 760 Palestinians since the so-called truce was agreed upon. Is that the Christian-like peace that JD Vance is referring to here? Don't try to explain or talk down to the Pope as if you know better. The Pope calls for peace, and this MFer says, well, our president accomplished peace. Look, 760 more Palestinians got killed. Total embarrassment, total embarrassment. Gaza Ministry of Health said on Tuesday that an additional 2,111 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli attacks since the ceasefire was announced, while a total of 72,336 people have been killed by Israeli forces since the start of Israel's war on the territory on October 7th, 2023. By the way, one of the other disgusting things that's going on in Gaza right now is there's still bodies trapped under the rubble. And you would think, well, the bombing hasn't stopped, but it's slowed down. So like, what's stopping the Palestinians from retrieving bits and pieces of their loved ones' bodies, from under the rubble now? It's because Israel won't allow construction material, bulldozers, things like that, into the strip so they can do that. And I only tell you that because the 72,000 figure here of people killed in Gaza is likely much higher when you consider the fact that the Gaza Health Ministry doesn't take into account the bodies trapped under the rubble. So, peace. This is peace, right? Anyway, so look, Vance was right to kind of blame the Biden administration for failing to reach a ceasefire. I will give him that. Biden wasn't great on Gaza. In fact, the reality that the Biden administration didn't wrap that up before the Trump administration came in, he deserves a lot of hatred for that. Okay, and I have no problem using that word. I hate Biden and I hate his administration for just greasing things and getting things ready for Trump to come in and escalate the slaughter and the genocide. Congratulations, Biden. You must be very proud of yourself. And Kamala Harris is going to run for president again. What a joke. What a joke. You weren't embarrassed enough the first time? So far, we know Harris and Buttigieg are going to run. Totally delusional. Totally delusional. As if they don't realize the moment we're in. Politics as usual isn't going to save us. Sit your ass at home. Go work at McKinsey. Leave us alone. The heckler called Vance out on something else to say that the US brought peace to the region when we're still allowing Netanyahu to, carry out so much slaughter with our tax dollars and bombs. It's kind of rich for Vance to take a victory lap. So let's take a look.
And by the way, not only was our administration like the administration that solved the problem, but the president. Excuse me, sir. Right now, you see more humanitarian aid coming into Gaza than it has any time in the past 5 years, because we have taken that situation seriously. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of about our administration, is whether it's there or Thailand and Cambodia, we have consistently tried as much as we can to solve these problems, not just complain about them like the guy who just ran away angry.
Okay, I'm about to get to the receipts to show you that he's full of crap. A lot of you already know, but I always like to prove the evidence or provide the evidence. But I'll say this. Yes, there are plenty of people in the audience that are just clapping like seals at everything Vance says. They're buying the lies, and that makes me very sad. But whatever, there are at least people in the audience who are pushing back. And they are heckling Vance in the right way, calling out the slaughter of children. Do you think those conservative audience members know about this mass slaughter of children carried out by Israel? Do you think they know that Vance is lying because they watch my show? No. They don't watch my show. You want to know what show they watch? They watch Tucker Carlson's show, or they, listen to what conservative critics, libertarian critics of Israel have been saying on their programs. I'm talking about the Dave Smiths, and there are plenty of others. And so when people get on my case about like, oh, you shouldn't give these conservatives credit, they're bad. No, I'm going to give them credit when credit is due, because it's very important for people to know the truth. And people live in bubbles. Media filter bubbles are a thing. And as a result, we have different perceptions of reality as a result of those media bubbles. So having conservative voices spread information and truth about what's going on in the Middle East right now is critical. It's important. And as I've learned myself on a very personal level, you take a lot of risk in being critical of Israel, professionally and in other ways. So yeah, I'm going to give conservatives who speak out against Israel credit. So I just want to make sure I, put that in there. Now, as far as the humanitarian aid in Gaza goes, it's still being limited, of course. So Israeli officials say that approximately 600 to 800 aid trucks enter Gaza each day. However, most of these trucks are carrying commercial goods brought in by private traders, not humanitarian supplies, meaning that the Palestinian people have to pay for it, which is hard to do when everything's been leveled. These goods are often too expensive for most people to buy and typically do not include critical items like medical supplies or other life-saving goods. The UN estimates that less than 20% of truck traffic into Gaza is carrying humanitarian aid. Refugees International and humanitarian partners estimate based on UN figures that only 110 trucks of UN coordinated aid have entered Gaza on average per day. So I'm sick of the lies. The United States government, because of its ridiculous, unwavering commitment to Israel, is complicit in endless war crimes in the Middle East, the destabilization of multiple countries, the mass slaughter of civilians, including children. And it's about time our government is honest about who and what they really are. Now, when we live in a democracy, we the people should be able to decide who leads us, who represents us. And it's about time that we reject any candidate who takes money from the Israel lobby or shows a shred of support for the belligerent pariah state of Israel. That's the only way things are going to change. Bonus episode for our members is next, tyt.com/join. We'll see you there.
We're kind people.